She thought it was just another summer BBQ, until a single question exposed the darkest betrayal of her life. What happened next? No one saw it coming. Stay with us as we unravel a story of trust shattered and secrets unveiled. You won't believe the shocking twist at the end. If this story has you hooked already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think happens next. The sun shone brightly over the Smith family's backyard, casting a golden glow on the neatly arranged tables. The scent of grilled meat mingled with the sound of laughter as family and friends gathered for their annual summer BBQ. It was an event cherished for years, a time to connect, reminisce, and celebrate the bonds of friendship and family. Sophia, John's wife of 12 years, wore her usual warm smile as she moved around, ensuring everyone had what they needed. She greeted the guests warmly, but her eyes often flickered toward her husband and their lifelong friend, Emily. Emily had been a part of their lives for as long as Sophia could remember. She had shared countless moments with them, from late-night talks to family trips, and had always been a trusted friend. But today, something felt off. Sophia noticed how Emily's laughter sounded forced, how her gaze lingered on John a little too long. The small, seemingly innocent gestures between them, the shared glances, the whispered jokes, stirred something deep within her. It wasn't jealousy, it was suspicion, a quiet voice in her mind that refused to be silenced. As the BBQ progressed, Sophia kept herself busy, chatting with guests and maintaining the facade of the perfect hostess. Her mind, however, was racing. Over the past few weeks, she had seen too many signs to ignore. John's late nights, Emily's sudden visits when he was home, and the vague excuses they both offered were pieces of a puzzle Sophia had been assembling silently. Today, she felt the time had come to confront the truth. As the afternoon sun softened into a golden haze, Sophia decided to make a toast. She stood with her glass of lemonade, her voice calm yet commanding. "Before we wrap up this wonderful day, I want to say a few words," she began, drawing everyone's attention. John shifted in his chair, his usual confidence replaced by unease. Emily, who had been laughing with a group of guests, suddenly grew quiet, her smile fading. "To family and friendship," Sophia continued, her tone light but carrying a weight that wasn't lost on those closest to her. "We're lucky to have people in our lives we can trust, who stand by us through thick and thin. It's a bond we should treasure, one that should never be broken." Her words hung in the air, her eyes locking onto John's for a moment longer than necessary. He avoided her gaze, reaching for his drink. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she held her glass, her fingers tightening around the stem. Sophia's gaze shifted to her. "And to lifelong friends," she added with a small, knowing smile. "You've been like family, Emily, someone I've always trusted completely." The group clapped politely, but an uncomfortable silence followed. Some guests exchanged puzzled glances, sensing an undercurrent of tension. John cleared his throat and tried to lighten the mood, joking about the grill running out of gas earlier. But Sophia wasn't done. She raised her glass higher and said, "To loyalty and honesty, two things that should never be taken for granted." Her voice was steady, but her words sliced through the air like a blade. The atmosphere shifted. Emily's face paled, and John's expression darkened. Sophia lowered her glass, her smile unwavering, and looked around the group. "Now, let's enjoy the rest of the day, shall we?" The guests murmured in agreement, though the cheerful atmosphere had dimmed. Sophia returned to her seat, her heart pounding. She had planted the first seed. Now, all she had to do was wait for it to grow. As the day moved on, the BBQ's lively chatter resumed, but an unspoken tension lingered in the air. Sophia watched from her seat as John drifted toward Emily. They stood close, too close, sharing quiet words that no one else could hear. Her heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. It wasn't the right moment, yet. The children's laughter broke her thoughts as they ran past the adults, playing tag. One of the little ones accidentally bumped into Emily, sending her drink splashing onto the tablecloth. In her startled reaction, Emily's handbag tumbled to the ground, its contents spilling out. Sophia's eyes zeroed in on the items as though fate had aligned them just for her. Among the lipstick and tissues lay a small velvet box. It stood out like a flashing neon sign. Sophia leaned forward, her voice calm but laced with curiosity. "Emily, is that yours?" she asked, picking up the box before Emily could react. The friend's face drained of color, and John froze mid-step. All eyes turned to Sophia as she casually opened the box. Inside was a delicate necklace with a gleaming pendant, engraved with a single letter, J. The crowd murmured, their confusion growing as Sophia examined the piece with a raised brow. "Beautiful craftsmanship," she remarked, her tone light but with a sharpness that cut through the air. "Did you buy this for yourself, Emily? Or was it a gift?" Emily stammered, her words failing her, while John stepped forward too quickly. "It's nothing," he said hastily, his voice louder than necessary. "Just a little trinket, probably left over from something we bought together as a group once." Sophia tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "A group gift, was it? Strange. I don't recall being a part of that group." She held the necklace up for everyone to see, the pendant catching the sunlight in a way that made its engraving painfully obvious. A hush fell over the guests, their polite smiles fading into frowns of confusion and realization. Emily reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to retrieve the necklace. "It's just nothing important," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Sophia stepped back, clutching it protectively, her eyes narrowing. "Funny thing about gifts," she said, her voice dropping to a chilling softness. "They always tell a story. This one? I'd love to hear what it has to say." The guests were no longer murmuring. They were silent, their attention now locked on the trio standing by the spilled drink. John ran a hand through his hair, his confidence unraveling by the second. Emily glanced around, her cheeks flushed as if searching for an escape route. Sophia, however, remained calm, her grip on the necklace firm. She had waited for this moment, and now she had them both exactly where she wanted. The stage was set. The truth was begging to come out, but Sophia wasn't ready to deliver the final blow. Not yet. The game had just begun. The BBQ, once filled with the comforting hum of laughter and conversation, was now cloaked in an eerie quietness. Guests pretended to return to their small talk, but their ears were tuned to every word exchanged between Sophia, John, and Emily. Tension hung in the air so thick it seemed to cling to everyone like smoke from the grill. Sophia returned the necklace to the velvet box, slipping it into her pocket as if she were pocketing a piece of evidence. Her movements were deliberate, each action calculated, while John shifted nervously beside her. "Sophia," he began, his voice low but strained. "This isn't the time or place to—" She cut him off, her eyes sharp as blades. "Oh, I think it's the perfect time, John. Don't you agree, Emily?" Her voice was light, almost sweet, but her words carried an unmistakable edge. Emily swallowed hard, her hands gripping the back of a chair for balance. "Honestly, Sophia," Emily said, her voice faltering, "I think you're misunderstanding something. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," Sophia repeated, her tone soft but laced with venom. She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Then why don't you explain it to everyone here? I'm sure they'd love to know how my husband's initials ended up on a necklace tucked away in your bag." John stepped between them, his voice firm but shaking. "Enough, Sophia. You're embarrassing yourself." His attempt at control only made her laugh, a hollow, humorless sound that sent a chill through the group. "Embarrassing myself?" she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "John, the only person embarrassed here should be you." Her words were like a whip crack, and for the first time John had no response. The crowd, now openly watching, exchanged glances. Whatever was happening wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was something much darker. Sophia turned to Emily, her voice dropping to a near whisper, though it carried far enough for those nearby to hear. "You've always been good at keeping secrets, haven't you, Emily? But here's the thing about secrets. They have a way of slipping out when you least expect it." Emily's face turned ashen, and her lips parted as if to reply, but no words came. Sophia took a deliberate step back, looking between the two of them with a mocking smile. "No answer? That's all right. The truth has a way of finding its way out eventually. Let's not keep everyone waiting too long, shall we?" With that, she turned sharply on her heel and walked toward the house, leaving John and Emily standing frozen in her wake. The guests buzzed with low murmurs, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place in their minds. Some looked on with pity, others with thinly veiled shock, but no one dared to intervene. Inside the house, Sophia leaned against the kitchen counter, her chest heaving as she struggled to contain the fire raging inside her. She clenched the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. The confrontation wasn't over, not yet. This was only the beginning, and she intended to finish what she had started. The cracks in their facade were widening, and soon she would shatter them completely. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the backyard. The once vibrant BBQ had lost its charm, replaced by an air of unease that no amount of forced laughter could cover. John and Emily stood awkwardly near the grill, avoiding each other's eyes while the guests whispered among themselves. Sophia's absence from the yard felt like the calm before a storm, a silence that promised chaos. John excused himself, muttering something about checking on Sophia. As he stepped inside the house, his nerves betrayed him, his steps hesitant, his breathing shallow. He found Sophia in the kitchen, her back to him as she methodically washed dishes, the sound of running water masking the tension in the air. She didn't turn around when he entered, but he felt her presence, heavy and unrelenting, like a predator watching its prey. "Sophia," he began cautiously, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "What are you trying to do? This isn't the way to handle things." She turned off the faucet, grabbed a towel and dried her hands slowly, deliberately, before finally facing him. Her expression was unreadable, calm, almost serene, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "I'm handling things the way they should have been handled a long time ago," she replied evenly. "You've left me no choice, John." He took a step closer, his hands raised in an attempt to placate her. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Emily and there's nothing going on. You're letting your imagination run wild." Her laugh was quiet but sharp, cutting through his excuse like a blade. "Imagination," she repeated, her voice laced with mockery. "You think I haven't seen the texts? The late-night calls? The way you look at her?" She took a step forward, her composure cracking slightly as her voice rose. "Do you think I'm stupid, John? Do you think I wouldn't notice my own husband sneaking around with someone I considered family?" John's face drained of color, but he forced himself to hold his ground. "Sophia, it's not like that." "Don't!" she snapped, slamming her hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the room, making him flinch. Her breathing was uneven now, the anger she had kept bottled up for weeks finally boiling over. "Don't insult me with your pathetic lies. I've been watching you. I've been waiting for you to come clean, to tell me the truth. But you couldn't, could you? Because you're a coward." John's jaw tightened, his attempts to stay calm slipping away. "You don't understand, don't I?" Sophia interrupted, her voice shaking but strong. I understand perfectly. I understand that the man I trusted with my life betrayed me, with someone who was supposed to be my friend. I understand that you've been lying to my face every single day, pretending everything is fine while you're off with her." She paused, her chest rising and falling as she stared him down. John didn't speak, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for words that refused to come. Sophia tilted her head, her voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "You're going to tell me the truth, John. Every detail, right here, right now." He hesitated, his silence speaking louder than any words could. Sophia's gaze hardened, and she took a slow, deliberate step closer to him. "You think I'm angry now," she whispered. "You haven't even seen the half of it. But trust me, you will." The tension in the room was suffocating, the walls seeming to close in on them as Sophia waited for him to speak. But John said nothing, his fear freezing him in place. Sophia's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Fine," she said coldly, brushing past him and heading toward the backyard. "If you won't tell me the truth, I'll find my own way to get it. And when I do, John, you'll wish you had been honest." As she stepped back outside, her calm mask firmly back in place, the crowd fell silent, their attention shifting to her like moths drawn to a flame. She felt the weight of their stares, but welcomed it. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about exposing the truth, no matter how messy, no matter the cost. And she wasn't going to stop until every secret was dragged into the light. The backyard seemed to hold its breath as Sophia returned, her steps slow and deliberate. She scanned the crowd with a faint smile, her demeanor unnervingly composed, as if the confrontation in the kitchen had never happened. John trailed behind her, his face pale, his movements stiff. He avoided meeting anyone's gaze, especially Emily's, who stood frozen near the buffet table, her knuckles white as she gripped a plate she had no intention of eating from. Sophia clapped her hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Let's liven things up, shall we?" she announced with a cheerful tone that didn't match the storm brewing in her eyes. "How about a game? Something fun, something honest?" The guests exchanged wary glances. They could feel the tension radiating from Sophia, and while her smile suggested levity, the fire in her gaze warned of something far more dangerous. Still, they nodded along, unsure of how to refuse. Sophia grabbed a nearby wine bottle and placed it in the center of the table. "A simple game of truth or dare," she explained, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But we'll keep it classy, truths only. After all, isn't honesty the best policy?" Her gaze flicked to John and Emily, lingering just long enough to make them both visibly uncomfortable. John shifted on his feet, while Emily's eyes darted to the exit, as though calculating her chances of escape. "Shall we begin?" Sophia asked, spinning the bottle before anyone could respond. The crowd watched, a mixture of curiosity and dread settling over them. The bottle stopped, pointing toward one of John's cousins, who laughed nervously before answering a harmless question about his first crush. The tension eased slightly as the game continued, the bottle spinning between family and friends. But Sophia's eyes remained sharp, her mind focused. She wasn't spinning the bottle for fun. She was waiting, biding her time, letting the false sense of normalcy lull everyone into a fragile comfort. When the bottle finally pointed at Emily, Sophia's smile widened, her teeth gleaming like a predator's. "Well, well, Emily," she said, her voice velvet smooth. "Your turn. Truth, as always." The crowd's attention zeroed in on Emily, who forced a shaky smile. Emily tried to laugh it off. "Oh, I'm not very good at these games," she said, her voice trembling. "Nonsense," Sophia countered, her tone too light to be sincere. "It's just a little question. Should be easy for you, given how close we've been all these years." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes darting to John for support, but he looked away, his face shadowed by guilt and fear. "All right," she said quietly. "What's the question?" Sophia leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her gaze boring into Emily's. The smile never left her face as she spoke. "Tell us, Emily, what's the most dishonest thing you've ever done to someone you love?" The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on Emily, whose face turned ghostly white. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. John started to intervene, his voice tight. "Sophia, that's—" But Sophia silenced him with a raised hand, her eyes never leaving Emily's. "Let her answer, John, unless, of course, you'd like to answer for her." The air was electric, the weight of Sophia's questions suffocating. Emily stammered, her voice barely audible. I don't know. I can't think of anything." "Oh, come now," Sophia said, her tone sharp, but still laced with mock kindness. "Surely there's something. Honesty is such a rare trait these days, wouldn't you agree?" Emily looked like she might crumble under the pressure. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Sophia rose from her seat, towering over the table. Her voice, calm but icy, cut through the silence. "Let me help you, Emily. Perhaps the most dishonest thing you've done is betray the very person who trusted you most." The crowd gasped. Emily's breath hitched. John's face turned ashen. Sophia leaned in closer, her words a whispered dagger. "Or am I wrong?" The truth hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. The game was over, and the real drama had begun. The guests sat frozen in their seats, the playful warmth of the BBQ now completely snuffed out by the suffocating tension. Emily's face was drained of all color, her lips trembling as she struggled to form a coherent response. The silence stretched unbearably, every second making it clearer that no denial would come. John looked away, his jaw clenched tight, as if willing himself to disappear into the ground beneath him. Sophia's gaze burned into Emily like a predator closing in on its prey. "No answer?" she asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Or are you worried the truth might be too much for everyone to handle?" Her words, sharp and deliberate, cut through the quiet like a blade. Finally, Emily stammered, "Sophia, I don't know what you're trying to say." "Oh, don't you?" Sophia interrupted, her tone now icy and unrelenting. She turned her attention to the guests, her voice rising slightly. "Funny how the ones who swear they have nothing to hide are always the quietest when the spotlight's on them." The crowd shifted uneasily, their murmurs growing louder. Emily's eyes darted toward the exit again, but Sophia wasn't about to let her slip away. "If you're so innocent," Sophia continued, stepping closer, "why don't you tell everyone here why I found a necklace with my husband's initials in your bag, or why the two of you have been sneaking around behind my back?" The gasps that erupted from the guests were loud enough to echo. Emily covered her mouth, her wide eyes brimming with tears. John shot up from his chair, his voice shaking with anger and desperation. "Enough, Sophia. You're making a scene." Sophia turned to him, her composure cracking for the first time. "A scene?" she snapped, her voice sharp and full of rage. "You call this a scene? No, John, a scene is what you've been making out of our marriage. A scene is sneaking off with Emily while everyone else is living in oblivion. A scene is treating me like a fool." John's fists clenched, his mouth opening and closing as if he were about to defend himself, but couldn't find the words. Sophia stepped even closer to him, her voice dropping to a chilling calm. "If you want to defend yourself, John, now's the time. Go ahead, deny it. Tell everyone here that I'm wrong." John stood frozen, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a vice. His silence was deafening, and in that moment, everyone in the yard knew Sophia wasn't wrong. Emily broke first. Tears spilled from her eyes as she shook her head, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Sophia. I swear, I didn't mean—" "Didn't mean for what to happen, Emily?" Sophia interjected, her voice rising. "Didn't mean to sleep with my husband? Didn't mean to lie to me every time you came into my home, sat at my table and smiled in my face? Which part didn't you mean?" I... Emily stuttered, sobbing now, her words incoherent. She looked to John, silently begging for his help, but he stood motionless, his eyes glued to the ground. Sophia's laughter was bitter and sharp, cutting through Emily's sobs like a whip. "Look at him," she said, gesturing to John with a mocking wave. "He won't even defend you, Emily. He won't say a word because he knows it's true. And you? You thought he'd choose you? You thought this would stay buried?" Emily sank into her chair, her body trembling as she wept. The guests whispered among themselves, their shock palpable. Some looked at John with disgust, others at Sophia with pity, but Sophia didn't care. She had waited for this moment, endured weeks of torment and suspicion, and now the truth was finally out. John finally looked up, his face pale and his voice hoarse. "Sophia, please, we can talk about this. Not here, not like this." "Not here?" Sophia snapped, cutting him off. "Why not here, John?" "You didn't care about here when you were sneaking around. You didn't care about here when you destroyed everything we built. So why should I?" John took a shaky step toward her, his voice desperate. "It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Sophia hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You don't get to call it a mistake. You knew exactly what you were doing. Both of you did. And now you're going to face the consequences." The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than any of them could bear. Sophia turned away from John and Emily, looking out at the crowd of stunned guests. "You all saw it," she said, her voice steady but cold. "You saw the truth, plain as day. I don't need to say anything more." With that, she straightened her back and walked toward the house, leaving behind a trail of devastation. The truth was out, but Sophia knew this wasn't over. The worst, she felt, was still to come. Sophia stormed into the house, her heart pounding in her chest. The confrontation had left her drained, but her anger refused to subside. She leaned against the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the knife block sitting in front of her. The smooth, metallic glint of the largest blade caught her eye, and a sudden thought crept into her mind. Dark, unrelenting, and impossible to ignore. Her breathing grew uneven as the weight of betrayal crashed over her. Every memory she had shared with John, every moment of trust and love, now felt like a cruel joke. And Emily, someone she had treated like a sister, had been complicit in tearing her life apart. The rage inside her wasn't just anger anymore, it was a storm, threatening to consume everything in its path. The muffled sounds of the guests murmuring outside only added fuel to the fire. She could hear Emily's sobs, John's frantic attempts to control the situation, and the guests' whispers of judgment and pity. It wasn't enough. Words weren't enough. They had humiliated her, shattered her trust, and left her with nothing but a broken marriage and a hollowed-out heart. Her fingers brushed against the cold handle of the knife as she weighed her options. A part of her wanted to walk away, to leave the mess behind and never look back. But another part of her, one she didn't recognize, screamed for justice. Not the kind that came from apologies or forgiveness, but the kind that left scars so deep they could never be erased. Sophia closed her eyes, gripping the counter until her knuckles turned white. The knife's presence was like a magnet, pulling her closer to a decision she knew would change everything. Her thoughts swirled with vivid images, Emily's laughter echoing through her home, John's lies dripping from his tongue, and the pitying looks of the guests as they watched her unravel. A loud crash from outside jolted her back to reality. She turned toward the window and saw John and Emily standing apart from the crowd, arguing in hushed tones. Their postures were defensive, their faces filled with guilt and fear. It was a pathetic sight, but it wasn't enough. They deserved more than to be uncomfortable. They deserved to feel the depth of her pain. Sophia's lips curled into a cold, humorless smile as she made her decision. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power, about making sure they could never hurt her or anyone else again. She reached for the knife, its weight heavy and reassuring in her hand. She didn't feel fear or hesitation, only a strange sense of calm, as if her mind had finally found clarity. The storm inside her had settled, replaced by an icy determination. Sophia walked toward the back door, her steps slow and deliberate. She paused for a moment, taking one last deep breath before stepping outside. The sun had almost set, casting long shadows across the yard. The guests were still murmuring, their attention split between John and Emily's tense exchange and Sophia's sudden disappearance. When they saw her emerge, knife in hand, the murmurs stopped, replaced by a stunned silence. John turned first, his face contorting in confusion and then horror as he saw what she was holding. "Sophia," he said, his voice trembling, "what are you doing?" She didn't answer. Her eyes locked on him, unflinching and cold. Emily took a step back, her hands raised defensively. "Sophia, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Let's talk about this. We can fix this." "Fix this?" Sophia interrupted, her voice steady but eerily calm. "The only thing broken here is me, and I'm done being broken." The tension in the yard reached a boiling point, the guests frozen in shock, unsure whether to intervene or flee. Sophia took another step forward, the knife glinting in the fading sunlight. The night was about to take a turn no one could have predicted, and Sophia was no longer holding back. The air in the backyard was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. All eyes were on Sophia as she advanced toward John and Emily, the knife glinting in her hand like a shard of vengeance. Her expression was unreadable, calm, controlled, and terrifyingly resolute. The guests remained frozen, too stunned to act, their whispers silenced by the weight of the moment. John held up his hands, stepping cautiously toward her. His voice shook as he tried to reason with her. "Sophia, put the knife down. This isn't you. You don't have to do this." She stopped, tilting her head as if considering his words. "You're right, John," she said softly, her tone almost thoughtful. "This isn't me. The me you knew wouldn't have said a word. She would have cried alone, bottled it up, and let you both get away with it. But guess what? That version of me died the moment you betrayed me." John took another step closer, his palms still raised. "We can fix this. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Sophia's voice cracked, her composure splintering as a wave of emotion surged through her. "You call destroying our family a mistake? You call sleeping with someone I trusted a mistake? No, John. Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was a choice." Emily whimpered, her back pressed against the table as Sophia's gaze shifted to her. "And you," Sophia said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You pretended to be my friend. You sat at my table, laughed with my family, all while stabbing me in the back. Tell me, Emily, did it feel good? Did it feel powerful, stealing something that wasn't yours?" Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Sophia, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Stop!" Sophia snapped, her voice cutting through the air like the knife in her hand. "You don't get to say sorry. Not now. Not after everything." She stepped closer, and the crowd collectively held its breath. John lunged forward, trying to grab her wrist, but Sophia was faster. She twisted away, the knife glinting dangerously between them. "Don't," she warned, her voice low and steady. "Don't make this worse." The tension was unbearable, the yard an emotional powder keg ready to explode. The guests, paralyzed by shock, watched helplessly as the drama unfolded. Sophia's grip on the knife tightened, her knuckles white as her chest rose and fell with labored breaths. The weight of betrayal and rage bore down on her, pushing her to the brink. But then something shifted. Sophia's eyes flickered with a strange clarity, a flicker of the woman she used to be breaking through the storm of anger. She looked down at the knife in her hand, as if seeing it for the first time, and let out a trembling breath. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "To see me broken, to see me lose control." She looked up, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Well, I'm not giving you that satisfaction." In a sudden, unexpected move, Sophia turned and hurled the knife into the grass, the blade sinking harmlessly into the earth. The crowd exhaled as one, the tension snapping like a taut string finally cut. John and Emily stood motionless, their faces pale and drawn. Sophia stepped back, her shoulders squared as she addressed the guests. "You've seen the truth tonight. Every lie, every betrayal, laid bare. Let this be a lesson for all of us." Her voice faltered for a moment, but she steadied herself, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "I deserve better than this, and I'll get it, without them." With that, she turned on her heel and walked toward the gate, leaving behind a stunned crowd and a broken man who had once called her his wife. Sophia didn't look back. She didn't need to. The chapter was closed, the reckoning complete, and the storm that had consumed her was finally over. The night had fallen completely by the time Sophia reached the end of the driveway. The cool air wrapped around her, soothing the fire that had raged within her for so long. The distant hum of voices from the backyard faded into nothingness as she walked away from the life she had built, now shattered into pieces too sharp to mend. Sophia didn't cry. She didn't feel the need to. Every tear she might have shed had already dried up in the weeks she spent uncovering John's betrayal. Instead, she felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation, a lightness that came from knowing she had faced her worst fears and survived. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a flood of messages from friends and family who had left the BBQ in the aftermath. Some were apologetic, others supportive, but none of them mattered. The validation she sought didn't come from their pity or outrage. It came from the strength she found within herself to leave. As she walked further into the quiet night, Sophia replayed the events of the evening in her mind. The confrontation, the revelations, the moment she stood on the edge of chaos and chose not to fall. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that she was more than the sum of John's lies. Her feet led her to the small park at the end of the street, where she sat on a bench under the glow of a street lamp. The knife was gone, buried in the backyard, but its symbolic weight had also lifted from her shoulders. She breathed deeply, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, and for the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. Sophia's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her sister. "Come stay with me for a while. You don't have to go through this alone." She stared at the screen for a moment before typing back a simple reply. "I'd like that. Thank you." The quiet of the night wrapped around her like a protective cocoon, and Sophia allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She had lost a husband, a friend, and the life she thought she knew, but she had found something far more valuable: her strength, her dignity, and the courage to start over. As the first stars appeared in the sky above her, Sophia rose from the bench and began to walk again, this time with purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, and the pain of betrayal would linger, but it no longer controlled her. She was free, free to rebuild, free to rediscover herself, and free to write a new chapter in her life. And she would, on her own terms.